Hello everyone, this is part 6 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto spun at the oddly familiar voice, coming across a group of four-leaf shinobi, all now looking at him expectantly. There was the obvious sensei of the group, a tall raven-haired woman with piercing red eyes wrapped up in the strangest dress Naruto had ever seen. It looked like it was made from rolls of paper with strange patterns down the center of each strip. It was sleeveless on one side and on the other there was a bright red sleeve, almost the same color as her eyes. From the impracticality of her clothing, Naruto would have guessed she was mainly a genjutsu type. To her right were two boys. The first was also familiar, a tall boy with unruly brown hair and slitted eyes like Naruto except his lacked irises. The most discerning features were his triangular clan markings that adorned each cheek, as well as the small white puppy that rested on top of his head. He wore a fairly plain gray jacket with dark gray fur lining that was almost as shaggy as his hair. The only thing that Naruto could glean from his appearance was that he was naturally impatient, due to the way he irritably stood looking around. The other boy was what Naruto would describe as the epitome of average. His straight but wavy brown hair hung limply around his head, just held back by his headband. He wore a dull gray shirt with a navy jacket slung over the top and black shinobi pants. His hands were bound with tape, which at least told Naruto he liked to get in close with his fists, or that he trained a lot, most likely both. There was nothing else noteworthy about him, so Naruto moved on to the last of the group. No amount of time could have made her any less recognizable to Naruto. After all, she was the last face he had seen before leaving behind his life in the Leaf Village. She wore dark blue pants cut off at the mid-calf much like Tayuya's were. She wore a cream-colored jacket with a white fur trim opened down the middle to reveal a navy shirt. Her hair was shiny and straight in a short hime cut with two chin-length bangs framing her face. It was her pale, pupil-less eyes that stood out the most, giving her features an almost angelic look. Hinata. Naruto wasn't sure whether to be shocked or happy at seeing her. They hadn't exactly parted well, although he didn't think it was on bad terms. He noticed the leaf headband around her neck and smiled as she quickly walked over. Naruto, it is you. She rushed over and hugged him tightly, much to everybody in the vicinity's surprise. Tayuya especially was eyeing the newcomer with barely concealed suspicion and just the slightest hints of anger. Finally Hinata parted from the hug, slightly red above the nose, but so was Naruto. He wasn't used to such open displays of affection, never mind with him and a girl he barely knew. Naruto, I can't believe you're back. The wild-looking boy from her team walked over at this point, eyeing Naruto curiously, as well as his teammates. He especially seemed transfixed with Naruto's headband, which proudly displayed the kanji for 9 on his forehead. Tayuya's was left blank as she never felt any real affiliation with the Sand Village, or at least that was what she told Naruto. Gaara's on the other hand was the symbol for Tsunade, as it was on the team of 3 older ninja behind them. Hey Hinata, how do you know a ninja from the village hidden in the sand? Hinata didn't take her eye off of Naruto as she replied. He isn't, he used to live here in Konoha but he left when we were 7. Naruto frowned briefly when the girl said, we, but brushed it off as Kiba once again took to examining him. He looked a bit more defensive now and Naruto could tell from the way his muscles tensed he was ready to react to a fight. So he's a missing nin. He said it almost with a growl and Naruto took over the conversation from this point, not exactly comfortable with Hinata telling everybody this information. No. I left while we were in the academy, so I wasn't a ninja yet. I was just a civilian moving on. Kiba seemed to relax a little bit but still had that annoying curiosity in his eyes. Why would you leave though? Now that he really thought hard about it, he vaguely remembered a kid with similar blonde spiky hair from his early academy days. Then one day he just stopped turning up. Hardly anybody even noticed. The kid didn't have any real friends and the only time people would even acknowledge his existence was when he performed some outlandish prank. Naruto's eyes turned dark as he stared back at the feral-looking boy. I had my reasons. Tayuya finally decided to inject herself into the conversation and rounded on the 2-leaf shinobi in her own unique way. And it's none of your fucking concern, mutt. Kiba looked a little irritated but shrugged. his curiosity somewhat placated. This time Tayuya turned to the violet-haired girl who had initiated this whole conversation. And what about you, princess? Where do you get off announcing Naruto's fucking presence to the whole goddamn village? For his part, Naruto just sighed loudly. Just like he feared, taking Tayuya out of the comfort of the sand village had immediately raised all the defenses he had worked for so many years to bring down. It's alright, Tayuya, she didn't know. She looked at him questioningly. Naruto always took her side in a conversation, yet this time he had taken a more neutral position. It annoyed her greatly. They were supposed to be best friends, yet he was defending this girl that might as well have told the Hokage himself that Naruto was here. Hi Hinata, long time no see, huh? The previously timid girl nodded, now a little weary of the fiery redhead to Naruto's left. So you're here for the Chunin exams then? Naruto nodded and she smiled hesitantly. Us too, we were just going out to train actually when I saw you. He nodded again. Listen Hinata, as much as I enjoy catching up, we do have to go on and register. The girl nodded hurriedly. Oh, I know, sorry, I just saw you and didn't want to miss the opportunity to thank you. He just looked at her quizzically, unsure of what to make of that. That was the extent of the cultured vocabulary he could muster. Before you left I was shy and timid and I never really put much effort into my training. Then after the conversation I had, I blamed myself for you leaving. I started to work harder, put more into everything, and I even stopped stuttering. Naruto grinned broadly at that. He had always thought Hinata a little weird for the way she acted. To hear that he had helped her get over that, even unwittingly, was warming. Hinata, it wasn't your fault I left. She just smiled, some red entering her cheeks. I know that, but I was young and I guess I had a small crush on you back then. Now that was a revelation for Naruto. Back then he wouldn't have believed that anybody could like him, especially not in that way. Before he could mutter something that he was sure would have been just as cultured as his last response to something unexpected, the team leader of Hinata's group ushered him on, now intent to get to training. Well, I'll see you at the Chunin exams, Naruto. She smiled happily as she left, while Tayuya to his side just scowled and Gaara remained emotionless. What the fuck was that about? Naruto shrugged helplessly, just as stumped by that strange occurrence as she was. Like you said, Naruto, we do need to go to the Chunin registry. Gaara, always the voice of reason in the group, finally waded into the conversation, having been highly amused by the proceedings so far. Naruto nodded, still a little absent-minded after the odd encounter, but his wits were slowly returning. The 6 sand shinobi wandered through the village, taking in the sights, although Naruto quickly found that barely anything had changed in his time away. The village was as familiar to him as it had been on the day he left. Every time Naruto passed through somewhere familiar, his discomfort increased, as he received flashbacks of villagers beating him. They passed an alley and he saw his 6-year-old self being pinned down by large men while their friend cut horrible words into his skin. They passed the school and he saw himself sitting on a swing, watching the other children run around and have fun. They passed the park and he only saw the parents look at him coldly, warning their precious children away from the monster. Hey, are you going to be okay? Tayuya had noticed his barely concealed pain as they meandered through the village. He offered a weak smile for her concern and nodded. Yeah, just some bad memories. She nodded solemnly, sure that if they ever had to go to Earth Country she would be feeling the same way. She was a little surprised at herself when she subconsciously took Naruto's hand in her own and gently squeezed it. Some of his old self flooded back into him and his smile grew as he looked at her. Thanks, Tayuya-chan. She narrowed her eyes for a moment but decided to let the suffix slide this once. He was having a hard time and she didn't need to add to that. Other than noticing Naruto's obvious pain at coming home to his birth village, Tayuya's focus was fixated on one other thing. She couldn't help but stare at the enormous mountain that held the Hokage monument. The 4 faces of the Hokages stared back at her, unmoving in their rocky visages. It was an impressive sight to behold, going beyond Tsunade's imposing entrance in its sheer awe factor. Suddenly Tayuya and Naruto felt a wave of deja vu wash over them as 3 Anbu dropped down around the group of 6 and one immediately walked over to Naruto. We have been ordered to bring you to the Hokage immediately. Naruto just gulped at their arrival. He had smelt shinobi nearby of course, but being in a ninja village that was hardly worth mentioning. Tayuya just glared at him in a look that said, how does this keep happening to us? Naruto just nodded and made a move to go with them, however when Gaara and Tayuya did the same they were stopped by the other 2 Anbu. Our orders are for Naruto Uzumaki only. He just stared at the man defiantly. Where I go, my friends go too. The Anbu looked at each other and the one with spiky brown hair just shrugged. Fine, but they must remain outside of the Hokage's office. Gaara nodded while Tayuya still looked unhappy. Naruto just smiled. It's okay Tayuya, I'll be fine, believe it. Tayuya didn't know whether to smile at his infectious enthusiasm or smack him upside the head for using that annoying phrase again. She did both. Naruto rubbed his head painfully as he exited the Shunshin with the Anbu escort, once again finding himself overcome with deja vu as he looked around the office. It was familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. It hadn't changed much from the few times he had been in here as a child, still cluttered with countless oddities and books that littered the room. What especially hadn't changed was the old man sitting behind the sturdy oak desk that looked back at him. Naruto wasn't sure what to do or say as he looked across at the one man who had cared about him in his youth. He wasn't sure whether or not to be happy or frightened. He may have been the old man back then, but he was still the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. Sarutobi seemed to answer this for him as the old man got up from his comfortable chair and walked over to the smaller boy. There was a moment of hesitancy before, with a motion of a hand, he dismissed all the Anbu in the room. Naruto, the tone was warm, but he was still so uncertain of everything. He just remained stock still, staring at the very first caring person he had ever known. He flinched back when the old man dropped to one knee and looked Naruto directly in the face before smiling warmly and pulling Naruto into a tight embrace that left the young boy speechless. Suddenly he couldn't help it and tears broke through his defenses, spilling down his cheeks as he returned the hug and wrapped his hands around the Hokage's shoulders. Sarutobi finally disengaged from the embrace and looked at Naruto, his own eyes slightly watery. You've grown so much. Naruto sniffled a little as he pulled back the last of his tears, not wanting to look so emotional in front of the Hokage. I missed you, old man. Hiruzen smiled across at the boy. No matter how much the affectionate name may have annoyed him back then, he missed it nonetheless. I missed you too. Naruto had to visibly fight more tears from escaping as he heard that. He didn't think anybody would have cared at his departure. Finding out that even one had, he was overcome with emotion. I'm sorry for leaving. Sarutobi looked at the boy before him with a bemused expression. Don't come back after so long, Naruto, and let one of the first things you say to me be a lie. Naruto nodded tiredly. He should have known the perceptive old man would have seen right through him. Don't worry about it, Naruto. He looked pensively away from the blonde boy for a moment. I understand why you left. It should be me apologizing to you for how you got treated. You're right, I wasn't sorry. Naruto's smile brightened a bit as he thought of his life after leaving the village. I made friends that I wouldn't trade for the world. The Hokage smiled knowingly at him. Yes, the Kazekage's son if I'm not mistaken, although I only know the name of the girl and not much else. Naruto smiled broadly but also had a questioning look in his eye at how Sarutobi knew this. He laughed merrily, catching on to the confused look. Really, Naruto, did you expect me to just let you run away without finding out what happened to you? Naruto just smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. I've kept close tabs on you since then, watching your progress and development. He smiled warmly at the worried look on Naruto's face. I'm very proud of you, Naruto, as would your parents be, he finished in his head. Naruto beamed happily at this and the two began to recollect together. Naruto told him of many of the adventures he had shared with Gaara and Tayuya while Hiruzen happily listened to how his life had been. He was more than happy to hear that his life had been happy since leaving the village and reaffirmed his belief that taking him back would have been a mistake. I'm happy to hear all of this, Naruto, and I expect you to do well at the Chunin exams. Now I think we've been talking for a bit too long, your friends might be getting worried. Naruto nodded, looking at the clock on the wall for the first time since entering the office. Do you want to meet them? Naruto looked expectant, happily so to Sarutobi's keen eyes, and he laughed exasperatedly. Yes, I think that would be nice. I would like to meet anybody that would make your life enjoyable. Naruto grinned broadly, reminding Hiruzen of how the boy used to be, even if it was all an act back then. Great. Gaara's a bit shy, but he's really great when you get to know him, and Tayuya is, well, she's. Naruto furrowed his brow trying to find the appropriate word to sum up his very first and best friend. She's amazing, he nodded cheerfully. The word felt about right even if it couldn't adequately do Tayuya justice. Hiruzen just looked amused at the word choice, wondering about the red-haired girl a bit more. The Hokage motioned with his hand again and the personal Anbu that never left his side dropped down to admit the two sand genin into the room. Tayuya entered nervously while Gaara remained his usual impassive self and walked in as calmly as one would a shop to browse the goods. It helped that his own father had been a Kage and was used to dealing with the powerful auras they gave off. Immediately Hiruzen nodded solemnly to the young sand wielder. Gaara no Subaku, I was sorry to hear of your father's murder. My condolences to you and your siblings. Gaara gave curt nod, thankful for the sentiment as he stood over to one side, unsure of why he was even in here. Naruto has told me a bit about both of you and firstly I would like to give my deepest thanks. He chuckled upon seeing their confused expressions. Even Gaara had raised his brow at the admission. Naruto had a hard life in my village, he strained the word, hard, but moved on. It brings me great happiness to see that all changed when he left, and from what he has told me it is mainly thanks to you too. He extended his arm to Tayuya who nervously took it before he moved on to Gaara. However, when he extended the hand this time he was shocked but not surprised when sand shot out of the gourd on his back to intercept the contact. Ah, so it is true. Gaara nodded, knowing that the Hokage would know of his status as Jinchuriki. I look forward to seeing our participation in the Chunin exams. Until then, Sarutobi was interrupted as the door to his office burst open and a very irate woman rushed in, anger and irritation in her eyes. Hokage-sama, what is this I hear about Naruto? She stopped mid-sentence as she looked around and saw Naruto, giving him time to study her. She was of an average height for a woman of her age, somewhere in her late 30s if he had to guess. She had very wild untamable brunette hair that flamed out around her like a lion's mane. She shared the same red triangular markings on her cheek as the boy he had met earlier in Hinata's squad. Like him, she shared the same iris lacking slitted eyes and feral appearance, but with her purple lipstick she was decidedly more feminine. She wore a standard Jonin outfit that was a common sight in Konoha with the usual flak jacket. Underneath she had pants and a shirt that were brown and green respectively, giving her the look of somebody who enjoyed the outdoors, or at least camouflaging themselves in it. She was looking at Naruto with shock evident on her face, something that he could clearly see wasn't a common occurrence just from the way she acted. My god, he looks just like. She was quickly cut off from voicing any more of that sentence as the Hokage shot her a particularly dangerous look. Well, it was very good seeing you Naruto and meeting you both Tayuya, Gaara. He nodded in each of the directions as he said their name. Perhaps now you should go and sign in for the exams. Wait. It was the newcomer who spoke and it was directed straight at Naruto, despite another look from the Hokage which didn't look all that friendly. Naruto, do you have anywhere to stay during the proceedings of the Chunin exam? He just eyed her curiously but nodded slowly. Well, they provide accommodation here, don't they? The woman smiled in a feral manner that to anybody else would have seemed frightening, but to Naruto, who had seen the most feral look one can see behind the gates of his internal prison, it didn't have much effect. Nonsense. I would be more than happy if you spent the duration of your stay for the Chunin exams in the Inuzuka clan compound. It's much more comfortable than those huts they provide for the participants anyway. Naruto just gazed at her, still trying to figure out the underlying motive for such a seemingly generous offer. Thanks, I guess. The older woman nodded cheerfully, still maintaining that grin she wore. You can call me Chum. She looked around, seemingly noticing his two teammates for the very first time. Oh, and your friends are welcome to stay as well. She seemed to fixate on Tayuya almost as much as she had when she first spotted Naruto, and it sort of freaked the younger girl out. Naruto and his team were finally ushered out by the Anbu in the room while Chum looked at the Hokage victoriously who, for his part, sighed wearily into his palm. Was that really necessary, Chum? The woman turned to glare daggers at the older man. Damn right it was. I was stopped from adopting him, so you aren't taking this away from me. Hiruzen just sighed. I couldn't if I wanted to. He's a genin now, one not even of this village. I don't have control of him in that way. Anyway, you knew the reason why you couldn't adopt him. Chum snarled. Oh yes, because you couldn't give possession of the Nine Tails Jinchuriki to any one clan. She sneered as she said it, her disdain obvious. He was a baby Lord Hokage and you let him grow up hated and feared, unloved by anybody. I couldn't even get Kiba to befriend him because of the way the others acted around him. Sarutobi didn't deny her accusations, he actually hung his head a little. Don't you think I regret that, Chum? I was so worried when he ran away, who knows what could have happened to him. He looked up, passion in his eyes now, I was just lucky that it was the best thing that could have happened to him. He smiled warmly. You should have heard him chew. He spoke with such happiness when he talked about his friends. Kushina would have been so proud. A small tear came to Chum's eye at the mention of her friend before she cleared it with the back of her hand. Speaking of the red-hot habanera, she smiled fondly at the nickname she had given one of her closest friends. Did that girl he was with, Hiruzen held up a hand to cut her off. Yes, it would seem Minato's blood does run deep. They both shared a chuckle at the thought, both reminiscing fondly about their friends. Once they were all signed up for the exams, the three took some time to wander around the village. They approached the Inuzuka compound but opted against going in just yet, instead deciding that they would explore the village that Naruto had once called home. The two non-fire country natives were just curious about how the other village was different to the sand, while Naruto wanted to see what had changed. They enjoyed walking around the village, comparing everything to the sand. Tayuya idly remembered the description Naruto had given her all those years ago whilst hiding from a sandstorm, and she had to agree with his assessment. Walking down a new street really was like walking into a new country. Everywhere was just so individual, so unique. It really was different from her home for the last 7 years, yet they shared the same life and vibrancy that made the hidden villages so special. Suddenly Naruto looked around, as if just noticing that the sun was setting, and his face broke into a wide grin. I have to show you guys something. Without any more warning than that, the excitable blonde took off down the street and left without any other options. His teammates sprinted after him. The wound, though unfamiliar streets, trying to keep up with the tenacious Jinchuriki, who still remembered this route after so long. Finally they caught up to him just as his foot was beginning up a flight of stairs literally carved into the great mountain behind the village. Naruto, where the fuck are you going? It's getting late. Naruto turned even as he was running up the stairs and started climbing and backwards, still with the same pace. You'll see, he said it with a devilish grin that both annoyed and intrigued Tayuya at the same time. She cursed her heart for fluttering the way it did when he looked at her like that. She despised the strange and alien feeling she was getting recently ever since her body had begun changing. Finally, exhausted and panting from the long climb up the winding stairs, they caught up to the spiky-haired boy. He was sitting on what looked like some kind of stone platform that jutted out over the mountain, giving them all a breathtaking view of Konoha. With a start she realized he was sitting on the carved head of the fourth Hokage, a thought that both made her nervous and feel slightly devious at the same time. She walked over and joined him, noticing his pensive look as he stared out over his former home. She remembered him also mentioning that he used to do this in that same conversation in the cave. Is it like you remember? He smiled up at her, a deep, genuine smile that made him look like a young child again, not the battle-hardened shinobi he had become. Better. She joined him on one side, sitting down and leaning her head against his shoulder in the way she always did when it was just the 2 or 3 of them. Gaara also came and joined them, sitting down on Naruto's other side. I'm not resting my head on your shoulder, just so you know. The 3 of them shared a laugh as they just sat there, looking out over the village as the sun set. It set the sky ablaze with brilliant hues of red and orange, and for the very first time Tayuya saw how the color could be so appealing to her friend. The 3 of them sat up there in silence for a good amount of time, none of them noticing when minutes turned into hours as they just enjoyed the company of their 2 best friends respectively. Eventually Gaara stood up, knocking the other 2 out of their reverie as they noticed just how late it had gotten. I'm getting tired, and you 2 know how much I enjoy my sleep. He smirked as he said it. When Naruto and Kyuubi had finally knocked Shukaku around enough to allow Gaara sleep, he couldn't thank his friend enough. Now he took as many opportunities to do so, even after all this time. As if to second his opinion, Tayuya let out a long yawn and stood up as well. You 2 go on ahead, I'll meet up with you in a bit. They nodded, knowing that the blonde just wanted some time alone to reminisce about his old life before coming back. They nodded and Tayuya smirked. Don't take too long, I need my bed warmer. He smiled and nodded back and watched as Gaara carried him down the monument on a cloud of his sand, or as he liked to call it, the quick way. Naruto had smirked when he first heard him call it that. He had his own views on what the quick way was, but kept it to himself. He only stayed up there a bit longer, soaking in the sight of the village at night with all the lights from the various house and shops. He gazed up at the sky, smiling fondly at the familiar orange hue that just licked at the edges of the sky from all the unnatural light Konoha produced. He snorted loudly, hidden village his ass. He stood up and stretched, taking one last look at the village sprawled out beneath him before smiling and jumping straight off of the enormous stone head. He sailed down, enjoying the pureness of the feeling of wind rushing past his skin. Before he hit the ground, he stuck out a hand, plowing it into a building and leaving 4 long and deep gashes in the stone. He came to rest on the ground with a small hop before walking back up the wall he used to break his fall. He smiled, knowing that anybody who saw him would have surely called him insane while he just found the experience fun. The Inuzuka compound was all the way across the village, so he had a lot of free time as he jumped from rooftop to rooftop. He pulled out the small orange book he always had on hand and began to read it as he made his way across the village. He was completely unaware that there was another shinobi doing the exact same thing. Occam's razor hated being wrong, and sure enough, the two distracted ninja met with a resounding smack. They landed in an alley underneath where they had been jumping, and Naruto just sat there, rubbing the sot on his head where the jonin had hit him. He stared at the man in the dim alley, his heightened eyes easily picking out the man's unique features. His hair was a gravity-defying spiky mess of silver that jutted out to one side over his headband. He wore the standard jonin attire of the leaf with dark blue underclothing. His face was a mystery due to the equally blue face mask that seemed to always be present on the man's face. However, his truly notable feature was the slanted headband that covered the man's eye, an eye that Naruto just so happened to know was a Sharingan. He knew this because this wasn't the first time he had seen this particular ninja. Naruto sat up in the highest branch in the tree looking extremely bored as he lazily swung his leg back and forth. He hated reconnaissance missions with a passion, even the A-ranked ones. It was always the same story. They would receive some interesting intelligence about enemy movements of suspicious activities, investigate and find absolutely nothing. They were always sent on some wild goose chase or another. The only reason this particular mission was classified as a rank was due to them observing a shinobi team who were supposed to be their allies. It wasn't like they were actually expecting anything interesting to happen while observing a team on a C rank mission. However, like always, Naruto just went with what he was told to do, albeit with no small amount of grumbling and complaining until Tayuya knocked some sense into him. He looked around for his team, having difficulty picking them out with his chakra sensing abilities, which was the idea, of course. In actuality, the only reason he could sniff them out at all was because of his familiarity with them. Gaara was deep underground, monitoring everything via vibrations in the ground that his sand relayed to him in a similar way to his third eye technique. Tayuya was cloaked in a complicated genjutsu that weaved her presence into the natural background chakra. For his part, Naruto went with a more simplistic method, suppressing his own chakra to a point where he only had the bare minimum to survive. It had taken him a very long time to master this particular technique due to his massive reserves, but he had it to the point where only a very talented sensing ninja could detect him. The only problem was that he couldn't move quickly without giving away his position, as his body automatically sent chakra to his limbs when he did so. So that's how he sat, lazily waiting for the team they were observing while actively surprising his chakra. He smirked as he sniffed the air and smelled the blood of the two Chunin they had accidentally come across while scouting out the route the Leaf Shinobi would most likely take. From the bingo book, they were the Demon Brothers, and Naruto had made sure to keep them alive in order to collect the current ransom Kiri was offering for their capture. It was lucky that Naruto had noticed the noxious purple substance dripping off of the nasty shuriken chain the two had strung out between them. Otherwise, Tayuya would probably be in some serious trouble, as it was he had been able to grab said chain, making use of his inherent poison resistance. The two enemy ninja had been shocked by that long enough to be caught up in Gaara's sand. Last Naruto had seen of them, they had been trapped in one of Tayuya's worst genjutsu. She wouldn't tell him the specifics, but from the look in her eyes he knew it would be enough to keep them busy for a few days at least. He smirked again as he finally caught 5 unfamiliar scents entering into his sensory range. He alerted the others with a coded signal sent via taps to the trunk of his tree. Gaara would pick up on it and send on the signal to Tayuya. For now, their only orders were to observe. However, being allies, they were given permission to intercept any hostiles if the other team was threatened beyond their ability. Of course, this was only the case if they were sure it would not give away the primary mission. Naruto had first questioned the logic of sending them to spy on their allies, but the Kazekage had ensured him that all shinobi villages kept secrets from one another, even allies. So here they were, spying on Leaf Shinobi to get an idea of how well their genin were trained. Naruto had been slightly worried when he had further read the bingo book and found who the demon brothers were associated with. Zabuza Momoki was hardly someone to be trifled with. Of course that worry dissipated when he saw who the Jonin leader of the Leaf team was, an equally recognizable name from the bingo book. The copycat ninja of Konoha would be more than a match for the demon of the mist. He was suddenly made very alert as a sixth foreign signature entered his nose's scope. That wasn't right at all. Ninja teams comprised of 3 subordinates, the Jonin sensei, and on escort missions like this, the clients. He once again relayed instructions to the team to be extra careful. The scent of fresh blood had just entered his scope. What he witnessed next would be a battle he would remember for a long time, 2 extremely powerful Jonin going at it, both out for the other's blood. At first it seemed like Momoki had the upper hand when he trapped Kakashi inside of a water prison jutsu and Naruto was just ready to intervene. However, in a surprising display of teamwork, the 2 male genin of the team distracted Zabuza long enough for Kakashi to break out of his deadly technique. Finally, the fight swung in Konoha's favor as in an impressive display of the Sharingan's abilities, Kakashi used Zabuza's own technique against him. Naruto filed away that information for later. As far as he knew, there were currently 2 Sharingan users active. Both were high-level shinobi that were not under any circumstances to be underestimated. He had also noted that throughout the entire conflict, the female member of the team, under the guise of protecting the client, had done nothing to help her teammates. Finally, he was astounded as an unknown Kiri Hunter Nin appeared, completely to his surprise and apparently to Gaara's as well, if his message was anything to go on. Whoever this person was, they were amazing at hiding their presence. While this was to be expected of a Hunter Nin, this person proved that they were not due to their strange behavior when handling Zabuza's body. From that moment on, Naruto kept his guard up. It meant the Zabuza was not dead, and now he had an extremely skilled accomplice. The next week was once again spent observing the Konoha team as their sensei recovered from his overusage of the Sharingan, another fact Naruto filed away for later. The genin spent their time training, and Naruto had nearly fell off of the branch he was in when he found out they hadn't even begun tree climbing exercises. Granted, he had only begun under Kyuubi's instruction, but he lacked an actual sensei, so he just assumed it was basic ninja knowledge. To find out that wasn't the case cheered him up immensely, now rather proud with his team's abilities. If this was the rate they learnt at, then they might not even begin learning the kunai balancing exercise by the time they were ready for Chunin, ready being used loosely. The week passed otherwise uneventfully, with the 2 male members of the team progressing slowly, while the previously useless pink-haired girl proved to be almost Tayuya's equal when it came to chakra control. The entire week he had the oddest sense of familiarity when he looked at her, but whatever it was kept slipping away from him. Midweek, Naruto had a very strange encounter with somebody he immediately knew to be the fake Hunter Nin. He once again reaffirmed his beliefs that he was excellent at concealing his location and presence. He had found it odd just how feminine the boy looked and acted, and the 2 had an interesting conversation with Naruto, giving no impression that he even knew who the boy was. His answer to the black-haired boy question left him smiling as he walked away. Having finished collecting necessary herbs, Naruto was also left smiling. It was no mystery to him the gray that surrounded the shinobi profession. Most were glorified mercenaries just doing as they were paid. Few were inherently evil, merely carrying out the orders of their superiors, who in turn were carrying out the word of their paying clients. It was why Naruto couldn't bring himself to attack the other shinobi, despite their status as pseudo-enemies. If they harbored no ill intent towards him, then he had no reason to get concerned. Finally, there was some excitement at the end of the week as Kakashi and Zabuza seemed to recover simultaneously and square off on the bridge. Unfortunately, this time his accomplice didn't stick to the wings. Instead, he engaged the single male genin that was present directly as the kunoiki of the team once again, protected, Tazuna as Naruto had found he was called. Tayuya was on her sleep rotation, so it was just him and Gaara observing the fight, and what a fight they witnessed. The Uchiha managed to give the accomplice a run for his money as they fought back and forth across the bridge. Eventually he was forced into using his equally impressive Kekkei Genkai to subdue the not quite Sharingan user. Once Kakashi had seen that his student had failed to beat the imposter Hunter Nin, he started to fight Zabuza, a fight that equaled their last in displays of skill. Finally Kakashi gained the upper hand, and with an odd Raiten move Naruto had never seen, he moved to finish it. Unfortunately, or fortunately depending on the viewpoints of the various people present, the accomplice just managed to throw himself in front of the attack, taking Kakashi's lightning-infused hand straight through his heart. Naruto was tempted to go down and intervene, but it seemed useless by this point. Zabuza was finished, he had lost the use of both his arms, had a steady stream of blood coming from his mouth and was limping heavily. He quickly lost consciousness from the extreme wear on his body. Kakashi wasn't much better off, the combined use of his Sharingan and Chidori had taken away most of his chakra. That, coupled with the few wounds he had received from Zabuza's sever sword, left him in a weakened state. He was only able to stay conscious long enough to check that both Sasuke and Sakura were unconscious and not dead before promptly passing out himself. In a strange twist of events, Tazuna was the only one left standing, being left rather shocked at seeing only his second full-scale ninja fight. It was of course at that inopportune moment that Gato, the antagonist of this entire confrontation, decided to show up with an army of thugs and opportunistic bandits. He only looked amused by the carnage that his near destruction of the Land of Waves had caused. Naruto by this point was thoroughly frustrated, having no valid reason to intervene as long as the Leaf Ninja were not threatened in any way. His claw-like nails were digging into his palm in an effort to stop himself from simply jumping down and decapitating the cocky tycoon. Finally, a deep, feral grin crossed over his face as Gato ordered his men kill everybody on the bridge, the Leaf Shinobi included. In milliseconds, Naruto was on the bridge facing down the horde of weapon-wielding men, each itching for a good fight. Seconds later, Gaara joined him in a swirl of sand, looking equally annoyed at the small tyrant as Naruto was. Gato considered the two newcomers warily, eyeing up Gaara's forehead protector curiously, wondering how he had attracted the attention of three of the great shinobi village's attention. He shrugged it off and casually ordered his men to carry out their original orders, the eradication of all witnesses. It proved his downfall as he suddenly felt a tightening sensation around his neck. He could only look down far enough to see the thin coil of quickly hardening sand that was currently wrapped around his pudgy throat. He was slowly lifted high into the air by that same stream of sand, stopping the attacking bandits in their tracks. They all stared incredulously at their employer as his life slowly drained out in front of them before staring with a mixture of awe and fear at the source of the sand, namely Gaara. He had his hand raised like he was holding chopsticks, a dispassionate look in his cold, expressionless eyes. With a flick of his wrist, Gato's head jerked violently before the sand released him and he dropped lifelessly to the ground, a warning to the approaching men. A warning they unfortunately paid no heed to. The remaining mercenaries were quickly dispatched in a display showing why shinobi were the people to go to for proper jobs. Tazuna was once again forced to watch as men were heartlessly slaughtered, faring no better than if they were unarmed civilians to the two Jinchuriki. He understood it was in his own protection, but it didn't make it any less gruesome to watch. Luckily it was quick, and before long Naruto and Gaara were throwing their lifeless bodies over the bridge into the reddening waters below. Naruto was stopped from this activity by a violent coughing fit somewhere behind him. He turned to see Zabuza had awoken, but was in terrible shape. With a precursory glance, Naruto knew he wouldn't make it, yet he was still clawing his way across the ground. His massive sword was discarded behind him as he used what little energy was left in his legs to slowly inch his way towards Haku's lifeless body. Naruto approached, curious as to this strange behavior. From what he had gleaned in their short encounter, Haku was little more than a tool to Zabuza. The rogue Kirinin suddenly looked up at Naruto, coughing out Haku's name and motioning with a silent plea from his eyes towards her body. Knowing this to be the last request of a dying fellow shinobi, Naruto complied as best he could. He picked Zabuza's weighty form up by the shoulders and half-carried him over to where his apprentice and surrogate's son lay, a pool of bright red slowly spilling out from his body. With his final burst of energy in his body, he tore away from Naruto's hold and painfully limped the last few feet to Haku's lifeless form before collapsing once again, uncaring of his apprentice's blood soaking his clothing. He stayed alive just long enough to croak out his true feelings to Haku's deaf ears, wishing the boy he loved a better life in the next one before the life finally left his eyes, leaving a melancholic smile forever imprinted on his face. Naruto couldn't help but be moved as he watched the emotional display from the otherwise cold, dispassionate man. It reminded him of his fears on how Gaara might have been if Naruto and Tayuya hadn't been there for him. However, at the same time it reminded him of the good that existed in everybody, waiting for an opportunity to be released. Unfortunately for some, that chance doesn't make itself known until the very end, and Haku paid the price for it, never hearing how he was more than just a tool but actually had somebody who cared for him. Before the other ninja could awaken or Tazuna could come out of his shock long enough to question him, Naruto and Gaara quickly fled, the bodies of Zabuza and Haku with them. Naruto also sealed away the man's large sword, sure that if he got the chance he could return it to Kirigakure. Their mission here was complete, and after they buried the bodies of Zabuza and Haku side by side they left the land of the waves. Naruto smirked as he remembered just how mad Tayuya had been after that day, feeling left out from all the fun. Even more so she was curious about the impact the missing nin and his apprentice had on Naruto. Their lives struck him so deeply as Haku's story was so similar to his own, leaving his villages due to persecution and finding companionship and purpose. He never told anybody this, but Naruto had made a vow that day to always strive to protect those closest to him, as in Haku's own words, when a person has something important they want to protect, that's when they can become truly strong. Coming out of his dazed recollections, he stared at the silvery-haired man across from him who was also rubbing his head in annoyance. Naruto stood up, a decidedly apologetic look on his face as he walked over and offered his hand to the man. He took it instinctively without even looking and allowed Naruto to haul him to his feet. Kakashi finally looked around at his assailant and did a double take. Sensei. Naruto, always his coherent and articulate self, managed to get out a single word. Ha. Kakashi peered closer for a moment and noticed the boy in front of him was not in fact the man his confused brain had originally mistook him for. Sorry about that, I guess I was distracted. Kakashi mumbled off a similar apology, never breaking his gaze away from Naruto's face. Started to get slightly weirded out by how the man was acting. Naruto backed up a bit. He had to get to the Inuzuka compound before long and didn't have time to stand around talking. Well, I gotta go, sorry again. Naruto reached down for the book he had dropped and took off again while Kakashi just watched him leave, book in hand once again. A tiny tear slid its way out of his visible upturned eye, dampening his ever-present mask slightly. I'm so proud. His face stayed glued in that ridiculous manner as he took off with more vigor than usual, headed straight in the direction of the Hokage's building. He was now determined to get some answers, and when it concerned his late sensei and his legacy, Kakashi Hatake, son of the White Fang of Konoha, wasn't going to take no for an answer. Naruto had sprinted to the compound, wanting to make up for the lost time his collision had cost him. It still didn't even leave him panting as he rounded the corner and neatly smacked into a certain feral boy and his canine companion. Both teens were sent backwards as Naruto made his second collision of the night. Hey, watch it. Kiba didn't exactly look happy as he stood up, rubbing his head and moving to pick Akamaru back up. Hey, you're that guy from before, Naruto, right? Naruto stood up as well, rubbing the same spot as his brush with Kakashi, the same apologetic look on his features. Oh, sorry about that, and it's Naruto? Naruto's a girl's name. He chuckled, catching Kiba off guard with his light-hearted nature. Most people found Kiba to be irritable and took offense to most of what he said when sufficiently irritated, which didn't take much. He noticed Naruto's outstretched hand and after a moment of hesitation grasped it. Kiba, the dog riding in the top of his coat, yipped loudly, somewhat annoyed at being left out of the greetings. Oh, and this is Akamaru, Naruto smiled, scratching the small puppy behind the ears, much to his obvious pleasure as he leaned into the contact. Ha, he seems to like you, doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. Naruto just rubbed the back of his head with the hand that wasn't occupied with stroking Akamaru. Yeah, animals just seem to like me, I guess. He ignored the throaty chuckle from inside his head. Hana would love you, she always has problems with animals that get uncomfortable in her clinic. Seeing Naruto's blank expression, he chuckled and quickly clarified. Hana's my sister, she runs the vet practice in Out Compound, except lately she keeps complaining about not getting assigned a genin team. Suddenly Kiba looked curiously at Naruto like he had just remembered something important. What are you doing all the way out here anyway? The Inuzuka compound's right on the edge of the village. Naruto wasn't sure how to explain that Kiba's mother had invited him and his teammates to stay with them until the Chunin exams were over, right out of the blue. Actually, now that he thought about it, that sounded all right. Your mother invited me and my teammates to stay in your compound until the Chunin exams are over. Kiba raised a brow quizzically, the sight almost making Naruto laugh. Huh, stay with us, why? Naruto tried to suppress the devilish grin that attempted to appear on his face. Truthfully, Kiba nodded, now extremely curious. Naruto just motioned with his hand for the Inuzuka to come closer. He did so and Naruto motioned again, This repeated a few times as Kiba got closer and more curious until Naruto was right next to his ear. The suspense was really getting to him now as Naruto smiled devilishly. I have no idea. Kiba backed away from the strange blonde, a large drop of sweat comically hanging from the side of his head. I'm alright then, I guess I'll take you in. Naruto happily nodded, and despite the strangeness of the situation, Kiba found his good mood to be slightly infectious. Inside the compound, Naruto immediately noticed the copious amounts of open land, no doubt for the nin dogs in training to practice or play in. Also on every door there was a flap or dogs to enter, and they were all suspiciously large. Naruto saw why when he saw an Inuzuka clan member walking with their companion, which came up to their chest. Kiba barely even seemed to notice the abnormal size of the various dogs around him, and Naruto couldn't help but take a curious glance at Akamaru. He was currently small enough to ride around atop Kiba's head. Would he grow to be that large as well? Naruto shrugged it off as it didn't concern him right now. Anyway, they were walking through the door into one of the larger buildings that were sparsely spread around the compound. Immediately the smell of dogs and wet fur washed over Naruto's senses, almost making him gag from the power of it. He managed to hold it in to not seem rude and quickly adjusted to the overpowering smell. He was sure by now that even if he didn't have a nose that could catch a rabbit half a mile away, it would still be strong. Suddenly 3 large dogs that looked suspiciously more like wolves rushed past him through the doggy flap in the door he and Kiba had entered through. They were quickly followed by a young woman, maybe 3 or 4 years older than Naruto and Kiba. She had the same clan markings as Kiba and Chum and the same general scent of animals, yet hers seemed to be more diverse. From that he took a wild guess that this was the Hana that Kiba mentioned before, and the variety of smells was from working with animals all day. She appeared remarkably less feral than the other Inuzukas Naruto had met, lacking the shaggy hair and slitted eyes. She wore a high-collared white medic coat, but Naruto couldn't see what she wore underneath. Suddenly Naruto felt slightly awkward as to why he had even thought that in the first place, but shook his head of it when Hana turned to look at the two of them. Hey Kiba, have you seen Mom? Kiba just shook his head. Nah, I was actually looking for her myself. At that moment, as if her ears had been burning, or more likely she was sneezing up a storm, Chum appeared around the corridor. Ah, Naruto, you're here, good. Your friends showed up earlier and said you would be coming later. She looked across at Kiba. Oh, even better, you've met my son. She then looked to Naruto's other side, and my daughter, it would seem. She smirked, showing off her elongated canines that matched Naruto's own, when he showed them. It seems like I'm missing out on a family reunion. Kiba took that opportunity to voice his most pertinent and eloquent question. Mom, who is this guy? Naruto looked across at him, smirking at him. He couldn't fault the boy for his directness. Chum on the other hand seemed to expect the reaction completely and even seemed prepared for it. The village hidden in the sand are our allies, Kiba. I thought it would be nice to let them stay somewhere more comfortable than those dingy barracks the outside teams normally get. Kiba still seemed suspicious but relented under his mother's gaze. Pack mentality was strong here, and it was obvious who the alpha of the house was. Hana only seemed amused by the answer, smirking at her brother's submissive look. Well, it was nice meeting you, Naruto. She made a move to follow the dogs that had run past earlier, but Chum caught her arm as she went by. Hana, would you be so kind as to show our friend to the guest quarters? The younger woman eyed her mother curiously, looking for a reason behind the request in her monochrome eyes. She nodded slowly and Chum smiled happily, with only a hint of her usual animalistic qualities. Naruto hesitantly walked over to Hana and tried his best to smile, but the sheer awkwardness of the whole situation turned it into more of a lopsided grin. Hana just sighed and made a motion with her hand for him to follow her. However, once they were out of earshot of her family, a long distance thanks to another of their canine qualities, she struck up a conversation. Is there any idea why Mom's taken such a shine to you? Naruto just shook his head, shrugging and looking a little lost. So what's the sand like? I've been on a few tracking missions but none into Wind Country. Naruto chuckled with genuine humor. It's hard to describe, but I think dry and hot best sums it up. Hana shared his smile as they walked out of the hut and across more open land. Naruto finally gathered the nerve to ask the question that had been bugging him for a while. So why do you guys use actual dogs as opposed to summons? Hana just looked at him like the answer was so obvious the question wasn't even worth asking. Easy, summons are good and all, but nothing beats the bond we Inuzukas develop with our companions. She smirked. Let me demonstrate. She pulled back his sleeve on her shirt to reveal a small seal on her shoulder shaped suspiciously like a whistle. She bit her thumb and smeared some of the blood across the seal, and before Naruto knew it, a high-pitched whistle emanated from her shoulder. It was so high that it caused Naruto to drop to the ground with his hands clutched over his ears in pain. Once the ringing in his ears stopped and his hearing returned, he stood back up, cowering a little while Hana looked at him with part curiosity and part shock. A little warning, next time would be nice, he tried to say it jokingly, but the fact that he was wincing, still clutching an ear, took away some of its humor. Sorry about that, humans aren't supposed to be able to hear it, it's specifically tuned to our companions so even the other dogs can't. Again she stared at him, intrigued by the strange reaction to her calling seal. Naruto just looked sheepishly at the ground, even as the three dogs Hana had been chasing before bounded over. Don't worry about it, my ears are just a little sensitive. Hana smiled, but on the inside she was still rife with curiosity over the strange boy. Sensitive, you can say that again, that call was over 40,000 hertz. They walked the rest of the way to the guest quarters in silence, both of them completely forgetting that Hana had been about to show him something. The dogs, which Naruto was now sure were in fact wolves, bounded along quite happily behind them, tongues lolling out. Hana led him inside, where he was suddenly tackled to the ground by a red blur. Coming out of his daze, he looked up at Tayuya's angry face. Her eyes were trying, unsuccessfully, to burn through his forehead with her sheer willpower alone. He just continued to look up at her with his normal cocky grin that he knew would drive her insane. What the fuck, shithead? You said you were right behind us, why the hell were you half an hour late? Naruto shrugged from his position beneath her, trying to fight off a strange sensation that was suddenly coming over him seeing his oldest friend from this angle. The fact that her warm thighs were straddling his chest wasn't helping at all. He really needed her to get off of him before. She's trying to say she was worried. Gaara's voice ripped through the awkward tension that had arisen, and Naruto looked up at Tayuya bemused while she turned away from him to hide her flushed cheeks. Like hell I was Sandy, I just don't like being left out of the loop. The fact that she wouldn't look at Naruto as she said that at least confirmed Gaara's statement. It brought a smile to his face. It always felt nice to be missed, not that he enjoyed making people miss him of course, but the sentiment was still there. Tayuya, you can get off me now. She was still blushing and trying not to look at him, not even realizing the compromising position she had put them in. She suddenly leaped back and quickly walked into one of the rooms behind them. Gaara threw an amused look between them as Tayuya stormed off before he too retired. Hana on the other hand was just barely holding in her laughter after watching the whole awkward but hilarious affair. She didn't say anything though, and with only one last look behind her at the odd trio she walked out of the building. Naruto heard her laughter echo away into the night and was slightly disgruntled she would find amusement in situations like that. He walked into Tayuya's room, puzzling out the strange feeling he had when she was straddling him, but not coming to any conclusion. He shrugged and climbed into bed behind her. She didn't say a word but allowed him to wrap his hand around her waist, and after a few minutes she snuggled back into his body, all their problems forgotten. Every morning was a blank canvas between the two of them. They had no secrets and no arguments that would carry over. It was just how they were together. Some might have called it an odd relationship to share with a friend, but neither of them would trade it for anything. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.